Hello, my name is Ruth Wilde. I'm the National Coordinator of the charity Inclusive Church. Thank you for inviting me to speak to the 2020 Liberation Theology Gathering online. My talk is entitled, With the Pandemic Heightening an Already Divided and Unequal Society, What Lessons Can People of Faith Learn to Enable Us to Build a More Inclusive Church? My friend Anna sent me a text message back in May saying that her friend and fellow midwife had died. She was only 29 and Anna was devastated. Safa Alam worked with Anna at the Birmingham Women's Hospital, and her death came just 2 weeks after the death of her own father from the same illness. That illness was, of course, coronavirus or COVID-19. Back then, scientists were only just beginning to see a link between higher mortality rates and people of colour. Many said perhaps there was a genetic reason for this, but those of us who have grown cynical about oppression in the world just knew in our bones that it was because of systemic racism. Eventually, a study came out that showed that to be the case. The main reason for the disparity in health outcomes between white people and people of colour is racism. Whether that looks like inequality in economic status, discrimination and stigma affecting access to healthcare, or the relative severity of diseases like obesity and diabetes due to increased instances of poverty, all roads lead to the same destination, which is structural racism. The pandemic has heightened the inequalities in an already unequal society. That's what crises do, sadly. It's the same story with climate change. A couple of years ago, I toured the country with the brilliant performance artist Peterson Toscano, and we used comedy and drama to highlight the very serious link between inequality and climate change. It is no coincidence that people of colour suffer more from the effects of climate breakdown. It's also no coincidence that poorer communities or LGBT people suffer more. These two crises, the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change, heighten the already existing injustices in the world. And this reminds me actually of the parable that Anthony Reddy talked about in his session earlier today. Many call it the parable of the talents, but I think we should call it the parable of the unjust landowner, or maybe the unjust master. The way we often interpret this parable in our churches is completely perverse. No Jewish man in the first century would have told a parable to promote usury or lending at interest. It was against Jewish law and against Jewish and religious custom. The interpretation that Anthony spoke about is actually far more likely to be closer to the truth. Jesus is highlighting the injustice of usury and the injustice of landowners and those in power and the world generally. He says pointedly, "Those who have much will be given more, and those who have little will have even the little that they have taken away from them." How wicked is that? That is not a metaphor for God. Just like Anthony said, that is a metaphor for the injustice and inequality in the world we live in. How could it be for God? My wife Ellie spoke to me the other day about the disparity in healthcare and how COVID-19 is not the first time that this has been noticed. Racism in healthcare didn't start with the pandemic. She told me about how black women are far more likely to die in childbirth than white women in this country. There's no genetic reason for that. The reason is racism. Black women are more likely to die because they're more likely to be ignored and less likely to advocate for themselves because they're ignored and belittled. Therefore, worse outcomes in childbirth. I've only so far really spoken about racism, but the pandemic has brought to the fore inequalities across the spectrum of areas that Inclusive Church works on. For example, the way that countries and individuals have talked about older people and disabled people as if they are somehow more dispensable is totally reprehensible. The situation in care homes has been dreadful, with multiple carers allowed in without PPE, spreading the virus to older people, but no relatives allowed to see sick and dying people, and the people in the care homes unable to say goodbye to people they love. That's not treating people like human beings. A way should have been found, and should be found, to be humane under these difficult circumstances. I've heard people say things like, "We can't all suffer for the minority," and "they were going to die soon anyway." Genuinely, somebody said this to me. Disabled people and older people are not a dispensable minority. They're our friends, our family, our community. They are valuable and valued, each and every one. They are not simply needs and burdens to society. They are gifts. How have we ended up in a place as a society where our sense of community is so destroyed that we see some people as independent and useful and others as dispensable and burdensome? The truth is that all of us are a combination of needs and gifts, as one of my trustees says. All of us. And we will all get old and probably have health issues and or become disabled as we get older, if we are fortunate enough to live to a good age. Disabled people and older people are not them, they are us. It's important to note that many disabled people are suffering more in this pandemic than anyone else. Sometimes at genuine fear for their lives if they catch the virus. Many have been unable to see anyone or allow anyone to visit for the entire year. My friends, who are a disabled wheelchair user, and her husband who has health anxiety, and their 3-year-old daughter, have only just began about a month ago to see very few people in their garden. And then the cases began to skyrocket again, and they stopped. The little girl, the 3-year-old, hasn't been to nursery since February, and her mother has had to give up work on her PhD to do full-time childcare. I'm sure that in the case of my friends, the father does all he can to help with childcare, and that they only chose this way round because he can't give up his full-time job. However, in the bigger picture, women all over the country and the world have been taking far more of the childcare burden, even when it might make more sense for the man to. This is another one of the injustices brought to the fore by the pandemic. I could go on, but my brief is also to address the actions that we can take to build a more just and equal church, and by extension, world. I think the first thing is to look at any learning points we can take forward. This period has been almost universally a horrible experience for everyone, and some more so than others, of course. But there are nevertheless some glimpses of how we could do things better and learn from things. Let's take the example of online church. It's mostly, or at least partially, online, depending on the church. This has excluded some, for example, those who are too poor to have internet, refugees, for example. But equally, many disabled people I work with have said to me, "Welcome to my world." It's been eye-opening to learn that the world of online engagement is the one which many disabled people find completely normal. For reasons of either not being able to get easily out of the house or for reasons of church being completely inaccessible, many disabled people feel that online church has been an equaliser and an opportunity for them to be fully included for the first time. It's clear that going forward we need to do better with this. Perhaps this means delivering a mixed approach to online and in-person worship in order to better include and value everyone. At both of our Inclusive Church annual events, the Disability Conference and the annual lecture, neither of which are usually online, we've had people say to us that they've been able to participate for the first time ever, and it's been brilliant. Let's bottle that and let's take it forward as inclusive churches. Another thing we could do as churches is to think about how someone's background vastly alters the way that they approach things in life. We need to think about this before judging people. For example, when the Black Lives Matter protests happened, many people criticised the protesters for gathering in large groups with a pandemic on the loose, as it were. But sometimes anger at injustice is a stronger force than fear. And after all, black people have been living with the fear which comes from white supremacy for years, if centuries. In a similar way, there are often questions as to why black people and people of colour don't take part that often in climate protests. And one reason is probably that climate change, as important as it is not framed as an issue of the day-to-day struggle to live and stay alive. People of colour, more than white people will ever understand, are busy trying to live and just get by day to day. Climate action isn't the first thing on the list. For the same reason, working class people are not often found on climate protests either. The other reason people of colour are not often found on climate protests is that the people organising the protests don't think intersectionally enough too often. Those heightened tensions we talked about are happening now. Poorer and non-white communities are already suffering more than anyone else from the effects of climate breakdown. When we talk about climate change, we need to talk about inequality. Similarly, when we talk about the pandemic, we need to talk about injustice. Black lives matter, and disabled lives matter. Marginalised people are not dispensable, and it should never become normalised to have such clear inequalities and injustices in society. All the people the unjust landowner wants to take away from, we should raise up and empower. We need to make sure that those who have little are given more. That's how to build a just and inclusive church through the pandemic and, God willing, out the other side.